State calls Michael Gunn.
Gun.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You have a seat on the seat. Just that microphone, adjust your seat. And you state your name again, and spell your last name, please.
Sure. It's Michael Gunn. Last name is spelled G-U-N-N.
Good morning, Mr. Gunn.
Good morning.
Just barely morning. Where are you from, Mr. Gunn?
From Columbia.
Born and raised?
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Oh, grew up in Conway, South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
All right. Where you work?
Work for Forge Consulting.
And what is Forge Consulting?
Forge Consulting, we are a settlement planning firm based primarily in Atlanta. I run the Columbia or South Carolina office, and we work with people, plaintiffs and plaintiffs' attorneys, to help them really try to take the settlements that have been recovered for them and try to make them make these settlements last a long time. These people normally have been in catastrophic injuries or wrongful death of a loved one.
So your company works with law firms who represent people who've been hurt, and if they get a little bit of money to make them whole, you can help make that money last a longer time. Is that an accurate summary of what you just described?
Yes, sir, and that's the goal.
All right. When did you first start working for Forge Consulting, or do you work for Forge Consulting, or did you found it?
I'm one of the principals in Forge Consulting. We started in 2003. I've been there since 2005.
And what is your actual, you said you're a principal, what is your actual title at Forge Consulting?
I will be a principal and settlement consultant.
Okay. And so do you work directly with the attorneys yourself in arranging some of these settlements and structures and things of that nature?
Yes, sir, I do.
So if you could, what exactly is a structured settlement in a summary form?
Sure, kind of a primer on it. Essentially, a structured settlement is when it's only available to those who've been, first of all, to those who've been injured or involved in a wrongful death or workers' compensation. It's really a method for them to try and save money. And what I mean by that is when they get the settlement, they have an opportunity to put some of that money into almost like an annuity. And that annuity would pay them over time, much like a paycheck, because a lot of these folks have lost their jobs, they've lost a loved one, or they have bills to pay. And so by doing that, it allows them to receive that money, but not only do they receive the funds, they do receive them tax-free from the federal government.
Totally tax-free?
Totally tax-free, with interest.
Now, who actually funds these annuities that ultimately get paid out to those who've been hurt?
Sure. Well, generally speaking, the annuities are funded by the insurance company that's paying the claim, or the defendant themselves. That's generally speaking.
And when they pay that claim, where does that money go in order to fund the annuity? Does it go to Forge Consulting?
The only way it would go to Forge Consulting is if the check was made payable to that insurance company, and then we would forward the check on to that insurance company.
So in that instance, you wouldn't actually be really taking the money, you'd just be stuffing it in an envelope
We'd be a
and
mail
sending it on?
carrier. We'd just be a mail carrier, correct.
And I apologize, we're both speaking pretty quickly here. Madam Court Reporter can only record one of us at a time, so if I'm asking a question, try and let me complete it and then answer
No problem.
thereafter.
Yep.
So to clarify, the only instance where you would get any money is if the check is made out to an insurance company, you stuff it in another envelope and send it on its way.
That's correct.
But ultimately, the money comes from the insurance company to whoever's funding this annuity. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes.
And the people funding this annuity would be another insurance company or some other firm of that nature. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that would be the structuring of monies awarded in a lawsuit to the person hurt. What about monies awarded to the lawyer in a lawsuit? What about an attorney's fees? Can those be structured?
They can be.
All right. And how does that process work?
It's a very, very similar process. It's a similar outcome. The difference is The attorneys would be deferring it, but when they received the funds, they would have to pay the tax at that time. But it is a way to defer the taxes like that. But it's the same scenario. The money would have to come from the defendant and/or its insurance carrier. And there would also have to be language included in settlement documents, et cetera.
But it couldn't come directly to the attorney, could it?
No, sir, that would be constructive receipt, and the IRS would consider that taxable income.
Constructive receipt, and they would consider it taxable income. So can you explain that just a little bit more for me?
Well, if they receive the money, then the IRS is going to consider that taxable at the time it hits their account. And therefore, undoing that is going to be quite a bit of a problem.
And so then they would get taxed on all of that money, correct?
That is correct.
As opposed to just the amount of money that they wanted to get that year.
That is correct.
And you indicated that it would be deferred taxation. So to use an example, let's say I represent somebody on a big suit and get $1 million in attorney's fees. If I were to structure it, I could have that stretched out over 10 years, $100,000 a year, and then am I hearing it correctly? I wouldn't get taxed on $1 million all at once. I would get taxed on that $100,000 a year each year for those next 10 years. Is that a good way of describing it?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And as a result, pay less in taxes.
That's the goal.
Are you familiar with an individual by the name of Richard Alexander Murdoch?
I am.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for me?
Wearing a checked shirt and a blue jacket, it appears.
Let the record show that he identified Mr. Murdoch. When did you first meet Mr. Murdoch?
Probably 20 years ago, give or take a few years, 20 years ago. Probably at a convention or a continuing education seminar, since our primary market are plaintiffs' attorneys.
And what was your first impression of Mr. Murdoch?
Very jovial, friendly, never met a stranger, just a, generally nice guy.
Did you have occasion to work with Mr. Murdoch more going forward from that point in time?
I did, as generally speaking, as we get to know our clients, a lot of times friendships get born out of that. And you get more comfortable dealing with them, and so yes, I worked with his firm a great deal. Did a lot of work with his firm. I probably actively would work. I've worked probably 5 cases with Mr. Murdoch.
Now, in terms of those at his firm, did you work with Alec on a lot of cases or relatively few cases compared to his partners?
If you compare it to his partners, relatively few.
So most of the time you were working with the other folks at PMPED, but Alec maybe just a handful of times. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Alec hold any other positions other than his role at the law firm that caused you two to work with one another
Sure.
frequently?
Sure. At one time, he was the president of the Association for Justice, which is a voluntary organization of plaintiffs' attorneys. And so we'd be very closely together at trial lawyer events and things of that nature, CLEs.
And is there a shorthand for that organization that used to be applied to it, the
SCAJ.
SCAJ? As part of your professional relationship with Alec, what sorts of things would y'all do together?
Again, usually these would be at events. It was never really a one-off. It was usually events. Golf, dinner, lunch, things like that. Just, things that you would do. Things that you would do when you're at a Hilton Head.
About how many times would you say you golf together?
I'd probably say I'd put the over-under around 15.
15?
Yeah.
And you'd go have dinner, maybe some drinks together at the conference, correct?
Not every year, but we would see each other. But, dinner was probably few and far between.
Did you ever go hang out with Mr. Murdoch at Moselle or any of his other properties?
No, sir.
Did he ever come and hang out with you in Columbia for dinner or drinks or anything like that?
It would be business related.
Did you ever go to any sporting events with him, like a Gamecocks football game or anything like that?
I never went with him. I may have seen him there, but never went with him, no.
There's a lot of folks in the stadium at Williams-Brice
Quite a
on
few.
game day.
Depending on the season.
Did Mr. Murdoch ever meet you in Columbia and deliver some checks to you and tell you, hey, these are for the clients for structures or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever meet with him halfway between Columbia and Hampton and get checks from him?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever call him and say, hey, can you bring those checks to me so that we can finance this?
Absolutely not.
And would Forge, under any circumstances, accept client money checks personally in order to fund an annuity for them?
No, sir.
And so, if you received or saw or reviewed an instrument made out to Forge, and it said in the memo line, money for client or something to that effect, would that instrument be legit?
Well, it would be returned to the person that sent it to us with an explanation as to why we could not take it.
You would not take it.
No, we would not take it.
In working with Mr. Murdoch, did you ever discuss options with him about how to structure fees for his clients?
Generally speaking, we have those conversations with attorneys, and I do remember he inquired about it, kind of went through what you would need to do, how you would need to do it, kind of the process in which it's done. So yes,
So did you explain to him some of the things that we've explained to these folks from around the county here today?
it's the same canned elevator speech I give to everyone. Just, this is the mechanics of how it works.
Were there any specific cases that he came to you and asked you about whether you could set up a structure?
I don't recall if there was a specific case. I do remember there was a case where we sent some options over one time and nothing ever came to fruition. It was just, here's what you can do.
Do you recall the name Dion Martin?
I do recall the name Dion Martin.
What, if anything, do you recall about Dion Martin? Was that one of Alex's cases?
It was. What I recall about that case is that I got a signed option from plaintiff's counsel, signed by Mr. Dion Martin, or I'm assuming Mr. Martin, saying he wanted to set aside X amount of dollars. Not really sure exactly what that amount was. And he wanted to do it to an annuity. And so annuities, like anything, it's kind of based off of stock market and whatnot, so they can kind of go up and down. So there's a time window in which you are able to purchase that. If not, the rate may go up, the rate may go down. And so I consistently sent emails to Mr. Murdoch as well as his paralegal, Annette Griswold. I would say at least 4, maybe 5 emails saying, hey, this is going to expire. This is going to expire if you don't fund this now. And after getting no response, after multiple weeks, we just closed our file.
So you did open a file for Mr. Martin, correct?
We open a file for every case, yes.
For every case, and I want to drill onto that a little bit. What prompts you to open a file?
Well, part of it is so that we can remember, if the attorney calls us and says, hey, I've got a case I'm about to start working on, or we got it, and they don't give us any information because they might be in the car, we can say, okay, this is the John Smith case, and I've got that tied to an attorney. And so that's how we do that.
So if you get so much as a phone call saying, I want to talk to you about so-and-so, you make a file,
That is correct.
even if it's just one conversation.
I always ask for a name.
Do you ask for any other information?
I ask for a great deal of information, but oftentimes that takes a little while to get. But the name is what I need first.
Are you aware of a boat collision that occurred in early of 2019 in relation to Mr. Murdoch or his family?
I'm aware.
And are you aware of generally any litigation that resulted from that case?
I'm aware.
After that boat crash and that litigation began, did you have any further conversations with Mr. Murdoch about structuring any fees that he might earn?
We had general conversations, generic conversations, but we never had any in-depth conversations.
He never asked any specifics beyond the general canned speech?
It was, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do.
Did he ever bring you any fees and say, hey, I would like to structure these or anything to that effect?
No, sir.
Do you recall in and around September of 2021, receiving a phone call from Lee Cope.
I do.
And what generally, well, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Mr. Cope called me, asked me if he could trust me, asked if he could trust my office as much as he trusted me, let me rephrase that, and said, I'd like to give you a name of some cases, and could you tell me what y'all have done for those clients? He gave me probably 10 to 12 names. I remember I was standing in my driveway, so I'm furiously writing down these names, hoping I could read my own handwriting. And I got back with Mr. Cope and told him I didn't have a file open on any of these people.
None of them.
Not a one.
Not a single name that he provided to you.
No, sir.
Did they follow up with you and provide you any additional names?
They did. The next day, he called me again, gave me another list of names, went through that list. The only name that stood out was Dion Martin that I referenced earlier.
Did they ask you about where Forge Consulting did its banking?
They asked me if we banked at Bank of America, and I told them we had not for the last 4 years.
Was it the last 4 years, or was it a little bit longer than that?
It was 4 to 5 years, somewhere in that range.
I jumped ahead a little bit. You are generally aware of the events of June 7th, 2021, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I am.
When did you first become aware of the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh?
Probably early morning, on June 8th, probably 5:36 in the morning. I got a couple of phone calls, a couple of missed phone calls.
What did you do after learning of the murders?
Other than being stunned by it all, I let my wife know, called a few other people. I let my business partners know.
Did you reach out to anybody in relation to Mr. Murdaugh or Mr. Murdaugh himself?
I did reach out to one or two of his law partners just to express my condolences and obviously asked them, hoped it wasn't true, but that was confirmed. And then I waited a day and reached out to Mr. Murdaugh and just let him know we were thinking of him, didn't have the words for what to say.
Had you ever met Paul or Maggie?
I have.
Did you know Paul very well?
I didn't know Paul very well. I knew of him, but I didn't know him very well.
How well did you know Maggie?
I knew Maggie, pretty well. She would oftentimes, I believe when Buster was in school in Columbia, she would text me and ask me where he could get his hair cut and where he could get his pants hemmed and things like that. And I was kind of like her local Google. So, but it was funny because I'd always respond to her.
You're in Columbia, Buster's in Columbia, she's in Hampton, and so she's texting you with questions.
Absolutely.
Did you attend the funeral for Paul and Maggie?
I did.
Did you see Alec there?
I did.
Did he say anything to you?
Not at the funeral, but after.
Did you go to a wake afterwards?
I did.
Did he say anything to you at the wake?
He told me how much Maggie had loved me and my wife and our family.
Between that wake and September of 2021, did you see the defendant, Mr. Murdaugh, on any other occasions?
I saw him in Hilton Head in August. That was the only time I saw him.
Where did you see him?
At the SCAGE conference in Hilton Head Island, the annual convention. That's all attorneys and vendors and whatnot attend.
But at the lawyers' convention in
Yes.
Hilton Head?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Oh. Was anybody with him?
His brother, John Marvin, was with him primarily, but others were around, law firm, members of the firm.
What was the scope of your interactions with Mr. Murdaugh at the convention?
We hung out a little bit or said, exchanged pleasantries, hugs, still, couldn't believe what had happened. And we did go to dinner. I went to dinner with him, his brother, and the majority, I don't want to count them off, of his law firm on, I believe it was Saturday evening.
Now, we've talked about Forge Consulting. Are there any subsidiaries of Forge Consulting or alternative names or other companies associated with Forge?
We do have two other companies that are Advocacy Trust, which is a trust company, and the other one is Advocacy Wealth Management, which manages, it's a veteran SEC-related wealth management firm.
Do you have any stumbling over my own tongue. Do you have any subsidiaries that are just named Forge?
No, sir, we do not.
Did you ever tell Mr. Murdoch that he could use the name of Forge Consulting or Forge for his own purposes?
Absolutely not.
Prior to September of 2021, did you have any knowledge that Mr. Murdoch was using the name of Forge for his own purposes?
No, sir.
Beg my own court's indulgence.
I'll stand for a moment. All right, come to order.
Showing you a document already in evidence as State's Exhibit 335. This document says it's a Bank of America statement. Is this an account statement from a Forge Consulting account?
No, sir, it is not.
Exhibit 335 on the Elmo for the Jersey Sea at Richard A. Murdoch, Sole Prop, DBA Forge. That's not one of your accounts?
No, sir.
No further questions for this witness.
By the defense.
Good afternoon.
You had some formal positions with the South Carolina Association of Justice?
Yes, sir.
What were those?
Did some government affairs lobbying work for them.
Okay, you on a contract basis?
As an employee and as a contractor.
Okay. And at one point in time, Alec Murdoch was the president of the South Carolina SCAJ?
Yes, sir, he was.
And were you employed at the time or contract lobbyist?
Yes, sir, I was employed at the time, yes, sir.
And part of his duties, well, I guess he was on the board for a period of time as well, right?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And the SCAJ board and the president would meet in Columbia quarterly, monthly, how often?
They would meet in Columbia probably twice a year. They normally met at the convention spots or the CLE spots, and then one was always by telephone. But usually the president was, even the telephone call, the president would come to Columbia.
And when he would come to Columbia, you remember Maggie would come with him and spend the night on those business trips to?
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know specifically for that for the Skage stuff, but I do, Maggie spend the night in Columbia, yes.
But you saw them traveling together in Columbia. I mean, you said you would see him in Columbia on business reasons. Was the business reasons his membership on the board and then?
I would generally speaking, most of the time, when I would see him, it would be because of that, yes, sir.
Okay. And then he and Maggie came to you and your wife's wedding in New York, right?
They did.
And my understanding is the big day came on the day of a big blizzard.
3 feet of snow, yes, sir.
And so you had to delay the wedding a day, right?
We did.
And you got to spend a lot more time with Maggie and Alec
And,
during that
and
period
all
of
the,
time?
all the other guests, yes, sir.
Right, and so, at that point in time, your wife became friends with Maggie and you all became pretty good social friends?
I think so. I mean, we still didn't really hang out much after the wedding other than professional settings, and that could have been just because of the distance between the towns, but yeah, we keep in touch, no doubt.
And then every year, I think you mentioned, there's an annual convention at Hilton Head of the, we used to call it trial lawyers, but
I still do too.
yeah, of the trial lawyers, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's usually at a hotel. It used to be at the Westin at Port Royal, I think.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
I think maybe they moved it, I don't know.
Marriott now.
Yeah, so, and there that there would be seminars, during the day, and then there'd be socializing in the evenings.
Yes, sir,
And it was a family event.
very much so,
And Alec would bring Maggie and Paul and Buster,
every time.
and you got to see him interact with his entire family.
I did.
And he was a family man, wasn't he?
By all accounts, yes, sir.
And you went to Maggie and Paul's funeral,
Yes, sir, I did.
and then after the funeral, you went out to Moselle,
Yes, sir.
and I'm sure, what was Alec's demeanor?
He was a broken man. You could tell. He was very upset. He was very upset.
And then you saw him a few months later at that convention at Hilton Head,
Yes, sir, I did.
and you said he was with his brother John Marvin,
Yes, sir.
and his son Buster was there too. You
I
remember this?
believe that's correct, yes, sir.
Now, John Marvin's not a lawyer, right?
He's not.
Is it unusual for John Marvin to come to the lawyer convention?
I had not seen him before, no, at the convention, no.
Right. He was there supporting his brother?
I believe so, yes.
And people were trying to lift Alec's spirits up and support him during that period of time?
I think so, yes, sir.
1 second, Your Honor.
I don't have anything further. Nothing further from the state.
Thank you, sir. Call your next witness.
Excuse me.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. If you'll have a seat on the stand. If you'll state your name, just that microphone there, and spell your last name for the record.
Brian Hudak, H-U-D-A-K.
Agent Hudak, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Where are you employed?
South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED.
All right, and what is your duties there?
I'm a special agent in computer crimes.
All right, and just briefly, what do your duties entail at the,
Conduct forensic examinations, cell phones, computers, vehicle infotainment modules, any sort of electronic device that can hold evidence. Also, I'm an evidence custodian for the unit.
Just a moment, sir. Now I have the jury go to the jury room for a recess. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to evacuate the building at this time, so we'll be in recess until we discover what's going on. We'll couple this with a lunch break until 2:30.